Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today's topic is finding missing people in the census. Now, we've all encountered this where we've searched and searched and searched and just can't find that one elusive person in a specific census. Maybe we've even struggled to find them across several censuses. So today I'm just going to share with you 10 of my favorite tips and tricks for pulling information out of the census that we might not be able to find in any other way. Before we do that, let me just give you a little bit of perspective as you approach census searching. It's common information, but sometimes we forget it when we're down in the weeds searching for our ancestors. So let's dive in with this starter. When you are searching the census, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The first one is, what was the census taker told? And by whom? I think a lot of times we forget that the census takers were paid by how many households they visited. And generally, they would visit a household 3 times, and if they didn't find anybody home to answer their questions, they would ask the nearest neighbor or somebody in town that knew the family. And so you need to know what that census taker was told, or at least have some kind of a general idea that there could be any possible number of things regarding names, birth dates, and birthplaces specifically that he was told. Now, you also have to think about the fact that there were certain periods of time where it was not politically correct to be from a specific country, to be Irish or to be German, and so sometimes people hid that fact or they Americanized their names. Just think about that as you're doing this. The second thing you need to think about is, what did the census taker hear that he wrote down? If your ancestor was from a foreign country, particularly, think about the accent they may have spoken with. And if the census taker was not familiar with that accent, how did they hear the names that they were writing down? Every once in a while, and people think I'm a little silly, but every once in a while, I'll think about the accent that my German great-grandmother may have had, or the accent that my Irish great-great-great-grandfather may have had, and I'll say their names out loud, not just in my head, but out loud with what I imagine that accent to be. And then I'll write down all the different ways I would spell what I'm hearing. So keep that in mind. And then the third piece of information, of course, and this is the one that gets blamed the most often, is what was actually transcribed or indexed. Not all of these census takers had beautiful handwriting, and so sometimes they leave the top of that O open, and so it looks like a U, or they, their little squiggle looks like an I instead of an E, whether it's dotted or not, and T's and L's and S's and capital S's and capital L's. Just think about the ways that things could look, excuse me, and then maybe think about how you would search for those kinds of variations. So those are just 3 things to keep in mind while you're searching the census, so that you make sure that what you're searching takes into account all the possible variables. Oftentimes people will just jump to the conclusion that, well, I guess my family was missed in the census. And I wouldn't be too hasty about jumping to that conclusion. Yes, people were missed, but the chances of that are so very low. So just keep at it. And here, with that introduction, let's dive into the 10 tips that I find most useful for searching in the census. The first one, like many of these, may seem really obvious to some of you, but if you're searching for someone in a specific census, search that specific census database. Don't be searching all of Ancestry.com. If you're looking for somebody in the 1870 census, don't waste your time weeding through 1860 and 1880 census results. Here's the easiest way to do that. If you just hover over search and click on the card catalog, you're going to see a listing, the default is by popularity, of all databases on Ancestry.com. You'll notice that the censuses rank right up there at the top of the list. Now, if you want to just quickly filter that list, you can just type in a word or a year in that title field, and you'll notice that what you're looking for jumps right to the top of the list. Now, once you get to that specific database, then you can search for the family that you're looking for. Again, what you're looking for is specificity, not broad search results across lots of different censuses. Tip number 2, on first search, don't mark anything exact. I know it's really tempting to say, I know that, my great-great-grandfather was born in this specific place, right? But the problem with that is that when you mark that exact, what you're limiting yourself, because keep in mind again that they could have been told incorrectly, whether on purpose or on accident. It could have been recorded incorrectly. Sometimes census takers would just ditto down the whole image and not take into account that not everybody was born in that location. So when I do my first search, I never mark anything exact. Now, there's this tiny little checkbox up here that says match all terms exactly. One of the things that might just be good to get in the habit of doing, if you check that and then uncheck that, you make sure that every one of these individual search filters is defaulted so that nothing's marked exact. So if I check it, it sets everything to exact. And then if I uncheck it, it sets everything back to default. That way, if I've changed those filters on a previous search, one of them isn't still set as an exact search. Now, typically, this is the only information that I'll include is a name, a birth date, and a birth location. Every once in a while, I'll get really crazy and maybe include where I think they should be living at the time. But know that for every piece of information you put in this search form, you're going to change the way that the results are viewable to you. They're going to be ranked differently based on every piece of information. Also remember that prior to 1880, so 1870 and previous, the censuses did not list relationship to head of household. And so what you're going to see is actually a different search form on 1870 census and previous compared to 1880 census. Here you'll notice we can choose family members to search for as well, right? And that's because after 1880, people are listed by their relationship. So if you want to start adding family members to search for in conjunction with that person, you can do that, and you can just add as many of those as you want if you know that they've got children, a group of children living with them or whatever. Again, your objective is to just do a general search with as much information as you know, nothing marked exact, and see what floats to the top of that list. Okay? Now, if we're going to give you I think it's going to be 4 stars or higher than 3 stars, I think is how it works, above this fold or this everything else below here we're not certain about. And typically these are the only results I pay attention to. Now you'll notice I only have 373 search results. I'm probably not going to go through every single page of these, right? But if it doesn't come up in the first few search results, I'm more likely going to just adjust my search results. And here's some of the ways that I might adjust those search results. From there, I can narrow my search results by adjusting my filters. I can start then playing with this exact versus unexact. So for example, if I know he was born in North Carolina and I'm fairly certain that that's going to be recorded that way, maybe I'll just mark that one piece of information exact, and now I go from 300 some odd search results to 27, and I can look through that list. Now you'll notice we're now having different first names. Well, that's because every other piece of information, the last name, the birth year approximation, the birthplace, are all the same. I can further filter that by adding or changing additional information. So I'm going to only want to see males, for example. Now I've only got 10 things to look at. Now this brings up a really good point. You'll notice one of these entries here is simply an initial. Before you just look at that and say, oh, that's not my person, I would recommend that you actually go look at the original image, particularly where only an initial is recorded. I always check the image, okay? And I do that because sometimes that single initial isn't exactly what was transcribed. And so I'll check the image just to be sure. In this case, it is an E, and so that's not my person, so I can go ahead and work my way back to those search results. if this doesn't give me what I'm looking for, maybe I'm going to set everything back to default, and maybe I'm only going to look for people who are living in this place, right? So again, what I'm doing is, with my set of information here, I'm just adjusting the filters by field one at a time to see what different search results that returns me, okay? Next, what I might do is search for all members of a family in a specific location. So if I'm looking for my specific person and I haven't found them, what I might want to do instead is search for all people with this last name living in this location exactly. And so what that does is it returns to me a list of 17 people. That's it, right? That's a very manageable list. I haven't searched for anything other than a surname with a specific location marked exact. And I can start to filter through this list. Maybe I want to actually search for other members of the family as well, right? So I'm not just searching by surname, but maybe somebody in the family has a more unique first name than James or William or Sarah, right? Look for that child or that sibling with a more unique surname and plug that in and see what happens. Certainly you're going to get different search results, and then you can hover over each of these. You don't have to click through to every one of them, but you can hover over them and you see this preview here that just gives you a snapshot of who's enumerated in the same household. Now remember, there's no relationships listed because this is the 1870 census that we happen to be looking at. But you can just hover over this and see who else is living in the household to determine if you've got the right family or not. Now this next clue, or this next tip actually, goes right along with what I was just talking about. Search for all people of the same last name living in a specific location. You'll notice I didn't mark this last name exact, and that's because I've seen this last name misspelled any number of ways. As a matter of fact, just in my search results here, you'll see I came up with it spelled with 2 P's, even though it looks like a lot of those have had corrections submitted. I've seen it spelled SCH. I've seen it spelled with an F instead of a P. Lots of different ways that last name could be spelled. So I didn't mark it exact, but I did mark the location exact because I'm trying to collect all the family members that might be living there. It's very possible in some circumstances where the head of household may have been off working somewhere. And so his wife and children may all be listed in a place, and he's not because he wasn't there on census day. So consider that and look for those other family members in the place where you expect them to be. Number 6 is search by first name with no last name. So the place where I've seen this be the most effective is in those times when people are living with people other than their own family members. So a lot of times we'll think, oh, well, I think I know exactly what I'm looking for, and we'll plug in all of this information and let's try putting in the correct place. We'll plug in all of this information and we'll think, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for, and then we get frustrated when we can't find them, especially when it's someone who is likely an adult or an older teenager, and why aren't they living with their family? Maybe we even found their family using some of those previous tips I shared. So I would recommend that you just remove this last name and then maybe mark things like where you expect them to be living and where you expect them to have been born. Mark those exact and do a search and see what comes up. You'll see I only have 188 search results. Now I could narrow that further by specifying a county or by narrowing that birth year a little bit more if 188 search results was too many for me. But the idea is there are times when people are enumerated in a household that is not them, right? This guy's listed as a brother. We have people here, I think if I remember this list correctly, we have people listed as laborers, we have people listed as grandsons, and so maybe their last name wasn't specifically written out. It was just dittoed down from whoever was the head of household. So pay attention to that as you do your searches and think about some unique ways that you could search using just a first name. The next option may seem a little counterintuitive to some of you, but try searching with no name, and you can do that. Every time I talk about this, people are like, you can do that? Of course you can do that. If you have somebody who you know was born in a very specific time, of course you can't be real specific about the place because census records only record a state, but you can be really specific about the location where you expect them to be living in, right? And so I can mark that exact, and I can mark the birth year exact, plus or minus whatever swing of years I want to include, and I can mark the birth location exact. I can even select the gender. So what I'm asking for here is show me all males born in 1831 plus or minus 5 years in South Carolina who are living in Lawrence, Georgia. That's all I want to see. And I get 0 results. I must have selected one of the, I tried this earlier, I promise. Let's do it this way. It might have been North Carolina. And that's what I'm asking for, is really specific search results. And if you're not getting search results, like you can see I'm not here, you either need to adjust your filters or adjust your idea of what it is that you're looking for, right? You can have, sorry, I'm just trying to get this to work here. You can have, it's not going to let me touch that. There we go. Search. You can have a different idea of what you're looking for than what the reality is. And then you can come and see, well, there are only 2 people, in this case they're women, 2 people who were born about this time in this exact place, living in this exact place. So I didn't even have to search with a name. I have found lots of people using this technique. And don't get hung up on gender. My grandfather's listed as a girl in one census. And it's that way on the census. So you can search without a name. Don't get hung up on that. The other thing is a tip that we have shared a lot as people were using the 1940 census and getting ready for the 1940 census to come out, and that is to search city directories to determine exactly where they may have been living. Now, Ancestry.com has a huge collection of city directories. You're going to find those in the card catalog. That's going to be the fastest way to find them. It's going to come up here on this first page, because it's one of our more popular databases, but you can use it, you can find it by filtering just down to city and area directories, and when you do that, it's going to be right here at the top of the list. Excuse me. So use city directories. You'll notice these go back to 1821. They go through 1989, so they're very extensive. If you're not sure if your location that you're interested in is included, you can just click on this browse to see what cities are included and what years are covered. Once you determine that the city and the years that you're interested are in here, then you can go ahead and search for your family members to see where they were living in any particular year. Once you decide, you know what, they were living here in 1901, well, then you know an exact location where they were living down to the address, and you can search the census that way. Now that becomes a little bit more of a browse experience, okay? And for those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, basically what it means is rather than searching, you're going to browse directly to the set of images that that contain the city, right? So I've gone state, county, city, and then to the enumeration district that covers the address where they were living. And you'll notice here I only have 21 images now to go through, and I can zoom in to make this bigger so that I can read the names. I only have 21 images to go through here, one by one, to look for my family. Now, once I have found my family, if I do, on this using this method, There's this tiny little set of gray arrows down here. I hope you can see them. If you just click once on them, it pops up the index, so you can see what we indexed compared to what was on the image. And I would recommend that when you find your family this way, there's a couple reasons for this. When you find your family this way, what you're going to discover is how we indexed it. Now, you may discover that we indexed it exactly like it is on the image and that you still didn't find it. So be sure to double check this information. Use that to educate yourself about how to do future searches. What could you have searched differently in order to find this record using search instead of browse? If this information is incorrect in this index, you can click on any one of these fields here that are green, and you can provide an alternate for the name or the year or the birthplace and select a reason, right? So either it was wrong on, either the indexer, the person who transcribed it, did it wrong, or the census taker somehow got incorrect information or wrote down incorrect information, so it's wrong on the image. Or maybe they're recorded by a nickname that you didn't know, and so you're going to put in their actual name, or vice versa. Or maybe it was a woman and you didn't expect her to be married to such and such a person. You can put in her maiden name. Maybe, and some of you deal with this, the name was actually changed. And there are instances of that across all ethnicities. When they come into this country, a lot of people Americanized their names or shortened their names, and maybe you didn't know what that version of that name was. So you can change that. All this does is it creates an additional index entry or an alternate index entry for this person. So you could search by what was indexed, or you could search by what was submitted as an alternate. And you've seen those. You probably just don't realize that that's what you've been seeing. You've seen those in probably most census records. When you get search results, it usually comes up looking like, let's see if I can find a good example, looking like this, where there's a name and then a name in parentheses underneath it. You'll notice it looks like most of these, it's a woman's married name versus her maiden name in these cases. Sometimes it's because the name was misspelled, or again, the name was wrong on the image, and so it wasn't findable that way. So when you search city directories to determine exactly where they may have been living, then you can browse directly to those images. Look for neighbors from previous censuses. I've used this one quite a bit, where I can't find my family, so I'll look again at the 1870 census, and I'll take note of the names of the 5 or 6 families living around them, and I'll go search for each of those families. A lot of times what I'll find is 1 or 2 of those families will show up somewhere, and then I look on the same page or a page or 2 before or after, and voila, there's my family. Again, they may have been misindexed, the image on the information may have been incorrect, but sometimes searching for those neighbors, even if they move, right? So that may make sense only if they're living in the same place, but a lot of times entire neighborhoods of people picked up and moved hundreds of miles away to a new community. So don't discount that opportunity to look for neighbors. And like I said, I'll usually do 5 or 6 families on either side of them just to kind of get a feel for that. Okay, and then finally, and this goes along kind of with number 8, where I will browse the entire community. If I have an idea of where my family members should be living, and it happens to be particularly small community. This doesn't work so well if your family lives in New York City, but if it happens to be a small community, I can just go directly to browse those records and go directly to the set of records that are for my particular family in that particular place. And you can do that with all census records on Ancestry.com, because all of them have images attached. And let me rephrase that. All U.S. census records and all U.K. census records. We do have a few Russian censuses and I think a Scottish censuses that don't have images attached. So any census records where you have images attached, you can just browse directly to the community and then just go page by page using these little arrows here through in this case, 26 images for that particular community. in order to see if you can find your family. And you can see here some of this writing is faded. It's pretty clean writing. I'm able to read it fairly easily, but you can see how things might get mistranscribed on occasion because of the way that it's written. Okay, so those are, I think, our 10 tips for finding missing people in the census. I would add a bonus tip for you, and that is, don't get discouraged. This sometimes takes a little bit of persistence, a little bit of perseverance. Every day, just about, as I interact with the community, whether through chat or Twitter or live stream or going out and speaking to communities of people, I discover that that it's not, people will come up to me and they'll say, well, I've looked everywhere and I can't find my family in the census. I had one just yesterday, and within just a couple of minutes I found exactly what she was looking for, and it's just that she had given up a little too quickly. So hopefully with these 10 tips, it's given you kind of a new perspective and some new motivation to go out and search for your family members in the census. If you still can't absolutely find them, one of the other things that I would recommend is that when you do come across them in a census, any census, always take a look at these suggested records on the side. Now, they're not always accurate, so they are just suggestions, but here it looks like it's found a 1910 and a 1920 census that our system thinks might be the same person. And so you can pop those up, and you'll notice I always pop them up in other tabs. I right-click on it and do that, so that I can compare the two records back and forth to determine if this really is my person or not. Sometimes I'll do that with 3 or 4 sets of census records, but if you can find them in a census, check out those suggested records and see if maybe that doesn't help you find them in another census that you haven't been able to locate them in yet. Hopefully this was helpful. If you're watching this live, I'll be available on chat immediately following this presentation to answer any questions that you might have. If you're watching an archived version of this on live stream or on our YouTube channel, you can email me at ask@ancestry.com. If I get I read those, and if I get a bunch of questions that are kind of similar, or a bunch of you didn't understand something, I'll schedule a follow-up presentation. You can also check out our Ancestry.com Facebook page. There's an events tab there, and you can see all of the topics, dates, and times for the live stream presentations for the rest of August. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.